Again, welcome to the session, Pedagogical Approaches for Inclusive Online Instruction. Our speakers today are Robin Davey from Simon Fraser University, Natalie Franson from Simon Fraser University, and Lisa Dick from Simon Fraser University. The session, again, is being recorded. To avoid any unnecessarily distracting others with background noises, please make sure that your mic is on mute. And also, if you have any phones next to you, please make sure that it's on vibrate so we don't hear it ring. And we have one presentation this session, and to make sure that everyone has time to speak, I will be watching time closely. I will send private messages to speakers 5 minutes, 2 minutes, and 1 minute before your time runs out. If you do not finish your presentation on time, I will need to interject to end your presentation. Please note, everyone, that I am not trying to be rude, as I have been instructed to cut you off when your time ends. So thank you again, and I welcome Lisa Dick, Natalie Franson, and Robin Davey again to speak to the session Pedagogical Approaches for Inclusive Online Instruction. You may go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, we're all from the same program, and we decided to put this together. So I'm going to let Natalie introduce the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Robbie. So hi, everyone. My name is Natalie, and I just wanted to give you a quick welcome to our session today. We're going to be talking about a few pedagogical approaches to inclusive online instruction, which of course is a timely topic as everyone's sort of moved quickly to remote learning. Crazy to believe it's already been a year since that happened. So we have some lessons learned, and we're really hoping to share some of our perspectives, but maybe more importantly, learn from some of yours as well. So we're looking forward to this. And I'll just say that during the presentation, if you have any questions, you can use the raise hand feature in Zoom, and you can post comments or questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to keep track of those as the session unfolds.
If you would like to put introduce yourselves in the chat, then we know why you're interested in the session and what your primary work is and what you hope to learn from the session. I can't see the chat. I was just looking to see if I could get it up there, but maybe I'll let Natalie, you go ahead and introduce yourself first.
So I'm Natalie Franson. I'm a PhD student at Simon Fraser University, and I'm also, for work, I'm an assistant teaching professor at the University of Victoria in the School of Public Health and Social Policy. So my interest is around inclusive learning environments, and my research focus is going to be looking at students with mental health related disabilities and how we can make the learning spaces the most inclusive for them and for all students. So it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, and I am a PhD student in my first year at SFU in the Faculty of Education in the learning Educational Technology and Learning Design program. I am currently working at Thompson Rivers University as a career and experiential learning coordinator specifically for Indigenous students. And mostly my interests are in Indigenous education and the intersections for technology and online learning. So I'll mute myself.
Okay, and I just want to say welcome everyone. My name is Lisa Dick, and I'm joining today's presentation from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples of Vancouver, British Columbia. Professionally, I work in digital emergency medicine at the University of British Columbia, and academically, I'm a PhD student at Simon Fraser University in the Educational Technology and Learning Design program. My interests are in educational technology, self-regulated and network learning, and learning health ecosystems, and I have no conflicts to declare today. Next slide. Okay, so this is our agenda for today. We're going to touch really quickly on inclusive learning communities and just give you a little bit of framework for what that means. Then we're going to dive straight into an activity. Then we're going to talk a little bit about mental health and learning design, Indigenous pedagogy, and UDL. We're going to do another activity, and then we're going to close. Next slide, please. Okay. So I'm going to begin today by very briefly introducing two of our core concepts, learning communities, as well as inclusive and responsive teaching. So Lee Comido defines a learning community as a culture of learning in which everyone is involved in the collective and individual efforts to understand. The goal of a learning community is therefore to advance the collective knowledge and as a result, support the growth of individual knowledge. Learning communities often share a common objective, value the diversity and experience and knowledge of their members, emphasize learning how to learn through the co-construction and negotiation of its members, and are intended to be structured in such a way as to share the learnings amongst the collective. Learning communities differ from more traditional designs of learning in that they de-emphasize the role of individual knowledge acquisition and performance. Next slide, please. So how do we design and support effective learning communities? Well, first, we must understand what it means to be inclusive so we can respond in ways that support learners. So this quote is one of my favorites when we start to think about the diversity of learning communities. A lot of different flowers make a bouquet. From a learning perspective, inclusivity means developing and designing environments and opportunities so that learners with diverse abilities, knowledge, and experiences can actively participate and engage with one another in meaningful ways. More broadly, this means a purposeful shift away from traditional design methods based in standardization. To do this effectively, we must be able to understand and identify both the visible and invisible challenges that learners might face. As Natalie mentioned earlier, the transition to remote online learning due to COVID-19 has made this increasingly challenging due to a lack of familiarity with the medium by many instructors. So that's part of what we're hoping to help with today. So our first activity, which we're going to engage in now, we're going to assign everyone to some random breakout rooms to discuss and create a list of visible and invisible challenges learners may face when participating in online learning communities and start to think about how you might be able to address them through learning design. So at this point, you might be wondering, well, what do we mean by visible and invisible challenges? So visible challenges can be things like gender, age, culture, language, or physical limitations. These are things that we can see and that society defines as perhaps being different from the norm. Invisible challenges can be things like color blindness, family challenges, social anxiety, or financial insecurity. These are all the challenges that impact learners but might be less readily apparent in our classrooms. When engaging in your small group discussion, think about what's made you feel included or excluded in an online learning environment, as well as any biases or privileges you may have. How could these factor into a learning community? You're going to have about 8 minutes in your small groups to discuss. We would suggest that you assign one person at the beginning of your discussion to take notes and who can be prepared to share back with the larger group when we return to the main room. Feel free to take a moment now and either note down the instructions or do a quick screen capture so you have them with you in your small groups. I hope you had good discussions in your small groups. So we're going to do a little bit of sharing now. And Natalie is very kindly going to share our thoughts and feedback onto the common slide here, which everyone should be able to see, and then we'll be able to share this at the end. So can I get the volunteer from group 1 to share some of your thoughts and feedback?
That was our group. So these are notes that compiled to the discussion. So listing off at the outset, language, access, which is your first or multiple language that you're working in, access to technology, various visible and invisible disabilities, inclusive of anxiety and mental health concerns. We also talked about aspects of introversion and extroversion, and very often, asynchronous has actually made more room for quieter reflection and an opportunity for introverts to be able to participate in more authentic ways. Economic background, family background that isn't able to support academic studies, maybe not able to buy the latest version of a textbook, maybe first generation students without the social capital. Also the cultural construction or cultural ideation of what learning is. And there's this big push towards discussion and co-construction of knowledge. And that is not shared universally and can actually be a deeply frustrating experience. While there has been increased access through online delivery, there's still split attention and ongoing responsibilities. And that has been a challenge. And then if we're working towards making our pedagogies inclusive, that might actually be messier and slightly disorienting for those who have done well in traditional exclusive delivery models, and we need to make a bit of room for that messiness and that deeper learning.
Those are great observations. Thank you, Jennifer. I think you've done a great job of getting us started here.
It was the group. It was the group.
Fantastic. Thank you, Group 1. Group 2. Do we have a volunteer from Group 2 to share some of your thoughts and feedback, please? Okay, maybe we'll look at Group 3.
Oh, I see.
I'll jump in, but I'll ask my group members to add on because we didn't formally take notes. So we came up with much of what has already been said. To it, we will add things like bandwidth, Zoom fatigue, open and respectful communication, ensuring that happens, ensuring that people know what that is at the start, timed assessments and how that can be disadvantaging to some learners who may be slower to read or to respond. The question of asynchronous versus synchronous, which has already come up. Some feel more comfortable in one versus the other. The issue of language that came up already. That's the rest has already come up. And we're not doing the second question right away, right?
You can feel free to share on the second question as well. Absolutely.
Okay, so in terms of bias, we didn't get very far. That's, wow, 8 minutes passed so fast. We had the bias, again, that we can assume that everyone has the same bandwidth, but that's not really always the case. And that everyone is comfortable with technology, again, not always the case, or that they even have access to technology readily. They might be in a household where there are 5 people sharing one laptop.
Yeah, I think those are great observations. I think even things like, Wi-Fi connectivity between rural and urban communities, absolutely. These are great observations. Group 4.
Yeah, so to say that a lot of what's come up it was echoed in our group. One of the things we did focus on was that assumption, kind of like what Maggie said about the digital literacy capacities that our students have, that everyone's coming in with maybe a similar skill set that might or might not be the case, and then the implications for navigation within like an asynchronous environment. And then we did kind of talk about what kind of solutions are available. And one of the things that came up was from the design perspective in terms of having a diverse group, design group, to kind of offer those multiple perspectives. I think that's it. If there's anyone else in our group who wants to add on to that, but yeah, I think that's it.
Thanks, Kelly. I'm going to add to this list just a couple of other thoughts. So some of the other things, so from an invisible challenges perspective, things like chronic illness, or even domestic violence or family challenges, there's a lot of aspects that we don't necessarily see and that might not be top of mind when we're kind of going into these kinds of activities. So there's lots of things and many more that we haven't talked about here, but I think we have a great list that we've started here that Natalie's got down for us. And I'm just going to pass this on now to, I think we're moving to Natalie next.
That was really great feedback. I mean, it's amazing what people came up with in 8 minutes, which makes me think that this topic is very timely for folks. It's obviously things that came quite easily to mind, which I'm glad that we're all in the same room together, because I think we're all going to learn from each other. So, and what you did bring up today is really sort of touching on a few of the points that we were planning on talking about as well. So that's also good to hear. Okay, so Robbie, if you don't mind progressing the slide. Okay, so as we think about inclusivity in online learning environments, it's helpful to think about our student population and consider some of the factors that might influence their ability to engage, feel included, and achieve their academic goals. And some of these are things that you just brought forward. Of course, one of those, which was brought up a couple of times, is specifically around mental illness. So mental illnesses are health conditions that affect the way people think, feel, and behave, and often in combination. So of course, this naturally has a really big effect on how they're able to engage and how they're able to learn. So mental illness is extremely common. So there's about 20% of the population who has a diagnosed mental illness. So we know that those numbers are much higher. So in our student population, it's at least 20%, likely higher as well. And we know that common mental health related symptoms such as fatigue and inability to concentrate, poor sleep quality, irritability, and depressed mood impact both engagement and performance. So considering the mental health of our students and considering mental health promotion in our learning environments can be a useful way to promote inclusivity and foster success for all of our students. Next slide, please. So what you see here is called the Mental Health Continuum Model, and it was created by the Mental Health Commission of Canada. So it's not specifically made for educational settings, but we've chosen to include it here because it is relevant to how we might look at creating more mental health promoting learning design. So if you look towards the left side of the continuum where it says healthy and reacting, those points on the continuum are really practical from the perspectives of both mental health promotion and learning design. So for example, course content and assessment can be distributed into chunks, which aligns with what we already know about scaffolding and mental health promotion. So mental health promotion is an approach that fosters the enhancement of individual resilience and control and promotes the development of socially supportive environments, including learning environments. Next slide, please. Okay, so what does mental health promoting learning design potentially look like? And of course, this is a massive topic. So in a minute or less, I'm just going to sort of cherry pick out a few things that you might want to consider if you haven't already. So we know that mental health related symptoms affect our working memory, problem solving, inhibitory control, and our ability to engage with others. So keep in mind that the symptoms of mental illness are common among our student population. So even students who don't have a mental illness, those issues around problem solving, inhibitory control, those very common symptoms of fatigue and inability to concentrate, those are things that we all experience quite frequently, I would say. Students do for sure, and particularly during the pandemic, we are seeing more challenges in those ways. And while educators don't have complete control over the learning environments in which they teach, they do have some degree of influence, of course, on the design elements, such as assessment tasks, learning activities, and the course material. So I'll just give a few examples of how you might consider mental health promoting learning design. So for example, to reduce demands on working memory, recording live lectures, and transcribing for future viewing, to reduce cognitive flexibility demands and promote problem solving and goal achievement, minimize the unexpected by articulating clear expectations, to reduce the demands on inhibitory control, break up large assignments into smaller tasks, and to create learning environments where students develop confidence through social inclusion and supportive and regular feedback. So these things I feel personally as an educator that are even more important now since COVID, where they all sound very straightforward, and having, a clear syllabus, having navigation where students know where to find the information, they know how to get a hold of you, they know how to engage. What I've seen in my own classes is that students, they just don't have the bandwidth right now to sort of take that extra time to figure out a confusing layout of the land. So it's really been good for me personally to look at all of the courses that I teach and to really try to make it as streamlined as possible and really keep that student health at the forefront. And that's really helping to make the design pieces good for the students and also good for us as educators. Okay, I'm going to pass it over to Robbie.
Okay. Yeah, so I have taken on and looking at how learning communities, specifically discussion spaces, I was interested in how to support more inclusivity in discussion spaces. And I looked at culture and how the learner's original, home culture, learner culture of ancestry impacts their participation, motivation to participate, and then just style of participation. Especially during COVID, we've all had to go online, so it became even more impactful how to deal with. What I was looking at was facilitation. So dominant narratives, just as in a classroom, I found were dominant narratives propagated and minority perspectives get lost, especially in asynchronous discussion spaces, but even threaded discussion spaces where there was one article discussed it in depth about whose perspectives are getting engaged in, so which threads were being carried on, and then that what came up was certain things like having the time and leaving those threads and discussions open so that people who have a lot more responsibilities at home, or like someone mentioned, technology and not access to technology. A lot of the students that I know were struggling with even having a platform at home to use. So with their gathering spaces, particularly closed because of COVID, there was a lack of access. And so just leaving those discussion spaces open and then having facilitation happen by the instructor was helpful to keep those threads kind of alive, I guess. I guess that was something that Villatsanos and Kimmins indicated in 2012, was just that the digital space can be the same type of situation. And then without cultural perspectives of the entire class, if it's not managed, we neglect the strengths and the strengths of other students who are not normally dominant. So I was just looking at how power shapes the space in which we learn, and whose experience is privileged and valued, and by who. I've said this already, but motivation to participate and share with others, whether or not the asynchronous space allows for that. We were talking earlier about how that has offered the ability for people to reflect over a longer period of time and not have to necessarily put up your hand in the classroom and be heard. There's time to reflect and think about thoughts and have that discussion go on longer. There's varying different perceptions of privacy, and inclusion creates opportunities for new perspectives, which I think I touched on a bit there, and how intercultural competency can be learned within a course. So one of the articles that I had looked at and was interested in this area was that all of our classrooms can be specifically, we can work out intercultural competency within the classroom, which does depend upon the instructor. So that brings up other aspects that I have kind of mentioned. I think I mentioned before in terms of facilitation. So whose role is it to facilitate discussions and facilitate ongoing communication within the classroom? So, and Morong and Desbian mentioned about group work and balancing the cultural diversity. Another article actually mentioned that it might be helpful, there's varying different perspectives, but helpful to keep the same group together for the whole entire semester, so that comfort helps carry through the whole semester between people. Yeah, and one piece I wanted to mention is, how are students aware of the ways that they are expected to participate? And a lot of asynchronous courses are based on a constructivist model of building knowledge within the space. And if that's not taught, and there's first time learners or first time online, so maybe being more explicit about how that is described, and that comes back to an original code sort of at the beginning that a lot of articles and a lot of scholars mentioned, to co-create kind of a way of operating within the course. And then that intercultural competency can be one of those learning outcomes, even if it's not stated outright. I guess I thought I had something more, but I included this model of Indigenous student success that Dr. Pigeon had developed through her work, and just sort of a reminder that all of the learners don't operate in the same way, and that Indigenous learners, this again, like Natalie said, this is a whole other big topic that can be engaged in separately, but that this just is one highlight of one culture that can have a very different worldview, and that all of the aspects, a holistic view of education and health and just in general is more prevalent. And so considering all of considering different ways to communicate, different ways to make assignments, assessments, and then different ways to engage in the class, more flexibility. And a lot of people have made changes to attendance and how people are engaging in the synchronous pieces of the class. So I didn't have much else except for the interconnectedness of intellectual, spiritual, emotional, and physical realms are incredibly important to most students of Indigenous heritage. And so building relationships with those students and, creating, good code of conduct at the beginning, or even maybe co-creating that within the class in the very first class, and how discussions are expected to carry out, and how to create more space for all the voices is not a bad thing to do. And then Dr. Pigeon has a lot more information about, in general, all across the board, a student experience at post-secondary. But in terms of discussion spaces and assessment and assignments, thinking about, everyone's, experiences at home and all their other responsibilities and community responsibilities is important too, in terms of flexibility. And so this goes back to my comments about preparation. And one scholar mentioned netiquette and putting those details in the course syllabi, co-creating a class code to foster student interactions, and then establishing expectations of critical awareness to support that intercultural learning, and then teaching dialectical exchange, because it is a learned skill. So if it's not something students know that they're expected to do, depending on what stage of the game they're at in their education. Facilitating discussion, I know there's different varying opinions on who is to facilitate discussion, and a lot of instructors want to shift that responsibility to the students, and I think it depends on knowing who your students are. And so going back to that first class and deciding what the tone of the class is, and who's facilitating the discussion threads, and that could lead to peer moderation if it's deliberately structured, and creating collaborative learning, scaffolded in activities. So just a lot of looking at your classroom at the beginning and deciding what works best for everyone, what the mix of the class is. So I guess I'll go into the next slide, and I think that's Natalie.
Okay, thanks, Robbie. So much of what Robbie has talked about aligns very well with what we already know about universal design for learning. So I'm going to try and not repeat a lot of what she said. But at the heart of it, given the diversity of our students, that multiplicity is foundational. So that's for engagement, for representation, and for expression and action. So this really does come down to a lot of the concepts that were brought up in the first discussion group around thinking about your student population and imagining how diverse they might be, and challenging any preconceived notions you might have of them, so that you are creating courses and learning spaces that are going to meet the needs of as many people as possible, not just the, sort of what we refer to maybe as traditional learners who come with, financial backing and good access to internet and in good health and lots of family support and all those kinds of things, but thinking about who else might be in those classes. And the more diversity you integrate into how you engage with your students, how you represent the course materials, and how you allow students to express their understanding and their, even just their relationship building with their peers and with the instructors, is really critical. And it really does make, as an instructor, it makes for better teaching too, because if you've considered multiple ways of doing things to meet this diverse groups of students, you're going to have more engagement in your students, which leads to better discussions, whether that's synchronous or asynchronous, which is more rewarding for the instructor as well. So I think everybody really does win. We are going to go next to another activity. So I'm going to pass it over to Lisa, Robbie, to just give a background on the second activity. And again, I'll be writing some notes for us so that you don't have to keep track of the group sharing when we come back.
Okay, so activity 2, we're going to put you in groups again and just thinking about what strategies do you employ in your teaching practice that integrate any of what we've talked about: Indigenous pedagogy, mental health promotion, and UDL, and how those all fit together. How has COVID impacted your teaching practice, and how have you been able to foster inclusive learning communities? And can you share anything that's been helpful for students or for you in this context? And I guess are we gonna have 5 minutes to do that? And then we'll come back and do another share and a discussion, even if everyone's interested. Okay.
All right. I'm going to open up the rooms now. We'll see you all in 5 minutes.
Questions, if you all wanted to share what your thoughts were, even if you're a faculty developer, so what you're teaching your faculty to do. I guess am I sharing still? Or no, did I stop? Okay, just one sec. I'll put Natalie's slide up. Just one sec. So maybe does room 1 want to go first? Alicia, Dahlia, Daphne, and Jennifer?
Sure. From our notes, and we focused almost exclusively on group work in our discussion, and talked about having consistent group work. And then we came to a quick agreement that most students and faculty hate group work at the outset,
Yeah.
but then can appreciate the outcome at the end of it. And how do we get over, what can we do to lessen the hate of group work? And one of the things is talking about the benefit of it and having clear guidelines, and maybe those can be co-constructed by the participants that work to value varied perspectives, not just perfectionism. Perhaps rotating roles, instructor requiring status checks, a mix of individual and group work to help prevent social loafing, and also including work around building trust within the group and peer evaluation.
Yeah, those are great suggestions. I do love that when people, as a student, when we get to co-construct rules and the rules of the group, or how we're going to go about it. So how about we go to room 2, which was David, Erica, Farnaz, and Huang.
Yeah, I'll jump in this time.
Okay, great.
One of the things that we talked about, the latter 2 questions, or the final question, we haven't done the research. We don't have an answer to that one. COVID hasn't changed because we've already been doing online learning. This isn't something that we pivoted to for remote. But with the first one, talked a little bit about how we can decolonize our courses rather than indigenize, and starting by acknowledging who we are. And I'm saying that as a privileged Caucasian, cisgendered, middle-class, middle-aged male who is rather it's easy for me to speak up and be heard, but recognizing what we're bringing to the course developments, and working with professors to recognize what they're bringing, what biases and assumptions we're all bringing, and breaking that down so that we don't assume that our students all have the same biases, assumptions, and backgrounds.
Yeah, those are all good points. I think that opens up great discussion too, and it gets people thinking about their positionality. Should we go to room 3? Danny, Jenny, John, and Stefan?
Sure. So our discussion was around a lot of UDL principles, and some of the strategies we've used is there's a resiliency curriculum for medical students that was developed, and previously it was a face-to-face activity with active learning and storytelling, and that was converted into self-directed modules, and lots of stakeholders have engaged with that. So there's an interest in kind of these types of skills in terms of the undergraduate curriculum, introducing social determinants of health or patient case studies into more traditional science classes. If it's part of a greater kind of health sciences degree, making sure that those examples have a wide range of diversity in what they talk about, who they involve, as like patient cases and how they can get resolved. Broadening the types of assessments so that even in large classes, you can appeal to a broader range of learning preferences and strategies, and ensure that accommodations are met even before they're requested. And then there's a big project that one of our members talked about recentering UDL into student-centered learning with strategy cards, and how you can provide these strategies to instructors when you work with them on developing content to suggest as you go along some considerations, much like the other groups have discussed.
Right, those are great. Yeah, student-centeredness has really become important, which is great. I like what you said about before an accommodation is asked for. That's excellent. Yeah. So we'll go to room 4. Was there, okay, Kelly, Molly, Rosa, and you're on.
Yeah, so our group, we didn't have anyone who taught specifically, but I brought up this speaker that I'd seen earlier in the year, who Michelle Pacansky-Brock is her name, and she talked about humanizing learning and this whole idea of facilitation of online learning, and meeting our students where they are, and that could be from kind of a spectrum of different factors. And one of the approaches that she uses is a survey that she gives to her class at the beginning of the semester. And it asks them questions regarding, you know, maybe not specifically where they live, but what's internet access like where you are? And tell me one thing you're excited about for this class, one thing you're apprehensive about, and it doesn't have to be about this class. Maybe it's from a mental health perspective, and, you know, asking students if they want to share their pronouns and those types of things. And one of the things that she indicates is that the information that she infers from that can really guide her in terms of who are those students that might need, she calls them extra watering, who in the garden needs a little extra water and care and attention. And I thought that's such a really, you know, wonderful way of approaching it. And it's not forceful. Students can share what they want, but I think it already sets the tone for such a welcoming environment. And it really is an indicator that there's a faculty, like their faculty cares about them. And so I would say her name, like I said, is Michelle Pacansky-Brock, and all of her information is openly available on her blog. So check it out if you can, including that survey. So yeah.
That's really, yeah, those are really good suggestions. And we had someone in chat, Jennifer said, what a lovely analogy. Yeah, great. I think that one of our faculty developers at TRU talks a lot about pedagogy of care and those, and teaches that way as well. So that was great. I am just going to, you can all see the shared deck now, right? With those, the follow-up, those answers, the group sharing for activity 2.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think we only have 2 more minutes. So we'll go to say thank you very much for attending this session. And if anyone else wants to jump in to say anything, Natalie or Lisa, it's been great to hear your feedback.
Thank you. And it was really nice to meet you all today. And thank you for participating and sharing with all of us and giving us all the opportunity to take something away today.
Thank you so much, Lisa, Robbie, and Natalie. This was a really great session. And thank you everyone who attended this session. I encourage you all to return to the schedule page of the conference platform so you can find the next session that you hope to attend. I will be stopping the recording now. Again, thank you all so much for attending. Bye.